So, why don't you tell the world who you are?
I'll tell the two viewers. Yes.
Yeah, tell the two viewers. This is being recorded, so
okay.
It gets released later.
Okay. I'm Derek Pryor. I'm a developer at thoughtbot. I am a co-host of the Bike Shed podcast, which is put out by thoughtbot on a weekly basis now. You can check that out at bikeshed.fm. I recently gave a talk at RailsConf on code reviews and how to do them well. I do a lot of internationalizing applications, which is very exciting.
Mm-hmm. You're my go-to IAT then guy.
Yeah, that's trouble. I've been doing web development for like 15 years now, so I've done a lot of different things.
Formerly at Akamai.
Can
we talk about that?
Sure.
Good, because it's live. So if we can, it's too late.
Yeah, I didn't have to tell them. I don't know what I'd have to lie about.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you about any clients. But.
Okay. Yeah, that's legit. Cool. Josh Steele's here. Great. Glad to have you, Josh. Oops, I didn't mean to say we're answering your question, but we're not. But anyway, and Dave Moore is here, and that's pretty awesome.
We got 3 now.
We got 3 whole viewers, which is cool. So please submit your questions via the Q&A plugin application-y thing for Google Hangouts, and we will answer them. Let's answer this now because we got one.
Yeah,
let's do it. Question by Jerry Busser. When you have Q&A resources on your projects, how do you work with them? How do you divide the testing responsibilities between devs and QA? How does that square with the idea of outside-in testing where devs write acceptance tests? You get this question.
Sure. I get it a lot, actually. A lot of people ask us this, and we come up against it on a lot of our projects with clients, or at least I have on a couple of our projects.
Mm-hmm.
What I suggest doing is working exactly how you were going to work anyway, as if you did not have any QA. So you are still going to write all of your acceptance tests and your unit tests and all that other stuff because that's what's driving your design, and it's important to you. And in those circumstances, I've always tried to make my goal is to make the QA person's job super boring, right? To find everything they're going to find. And then as to how we divide up the responsibilities of testing, we don't. And I think that if we were to like document test cases and both of us execute the same test cases.
Mm-hmm.
There wouldn't be much value to having the extra QA person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if the idea being that we should both be looking at a feature that's requested with whatever detail was there, implementing it how we think we should be implementing it, testing it how we should be testing it. And if hopefully we both agree that, yeah, this feature's done. But if we don't, because, the QA person thought that interpreted something in the ticket to mean this, then maybe there's value in that. Or maybe they test it with some different inputs than I test it with, obviously, and find some different problems. So that's typically how.
Have you worked on a project where you find QA people really valuable?
Yes, I have worked on projects where I find QA people really valuable.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on. I wouldn't say so much on a lot of the like greenfield apps we've worked on, but when there's a significant application already built that doesn't have a lot of test coverage, they know the history. Maybe they have their own automated tests that are like. Generally something more like Selenium WebDriver-y, not Selenium WebDriver, but Selenium, like the thing that you like program to click around, that kind of thing. Not the kind of thing you'd be writing in RSpec. Much higher level, or maybe if you're in an organization that has like you're in some sort of service-oriented architecture kind of application where you are playing a small part of a larger application, then QA that can kind of go between multiple different apps is better than you trying to like always fake out those other applications.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't worked on a team with QA in like a long time.
Yeah.
I seem to have fallen out of favor maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I think especially with our typical clientele, right? You don't like it's not a necessary expense. I think, especially with the way we approach things, we're going to be writing a lot of tests, and you're going to be looking at every feature we write.
Yeah.
To accept it.
Right.
That kind of thing.
That makes sense.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Jerry says audio just came in. How much of the answer did we lose? I don't know. That's interesting. Tom, are you hearing us okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so we answered the question, Jerry. Hopefully that was useful. Hopefully you heard it. And if not, we'll release the recording of this. So if some of that did get cut off, we should have a good copy for you. Next question. Hey, look at this. So Crispin is asking, can you give a quick rundown of how you do code reviews? When doing pair programming, does the code review take a different format? That's a good question.
Quick rundown of how I do code reviews is beginning of the day, end of the day are my 2 like big code review times. And then also I'll keep an eye out in the chat for an application to see like if code reviews are coming in during the day. Somebody will typically like paste a link, can you check out this PR? It has to do with X. Click on it, go through it, that kind of thing. I look for, depends on what I'm into that week, what I'm paying a lot of attention to. It's been a lot of single responsibility principle type stuff lately. Like I really want to extract a lot of objects that do one small thing. So I harp on that a lot. I harp on names a lot. Looking for unnecessary complexity. That's kind of gets back to single responsibility. Trying to look for like the minimal implementation of something that can actually work rather than like, are we guessing too much at a feature? So that's kind of what I look at. But like, I talk about this in my talk. It's really the benefit of doing code reviews is that everybody kind of has their own, like I have what I'm into this week. You have what you're into this week. And, you know, neither approach is 100% right. But like through whatever each of us is interested in, we kind of arrive at something interesting.
I find myself looking at hotspots a lot. Like for me, I find that schema changes and tests, particularly doc strings and test setup, tend to have things that people miss for whatever reason. I think tests happen because people tend to copy and paste existing tests. And so they forget to change the doc string. And they also, or people are maybe a little bit less inclined to extract test setup methods, perhaps. Like they'll have more duplication in tests and just kind of like not notice it versus in production code. So I sort of always look at those two places as like, I'm expecting to find a couple things there.
And I'm okay with more duplication in tests than in production code in general, but there is a point where like, okay, this is exactly the same between these three things. Can we extract a method that does this? I'm favoring that over a before block or a let block or something like that.
Yeah, always.
And then the other part was when doing pair programming, does the code review take a different format? Depends on the size of the team. Like if I'm doing pair programming and there's like 2 developers on the team, like that is the review basically. You know, maybe we'll throw it up on GitHub as a pull request and look it over together. But if there are 3 developers or 4 developers on the team, I still try to have that code reviewed because when you're doing pairing, a lot of groupthink can kind of settle in and like you're both experiencing the same things at the same time and having a discussion about it. Like, does what we came up with make sense to somebody who was not a part of that entire conversation?
Totally. And I think it's worth mentioning that we pretty much, at least on the projects I'm on, like we review everything. Like basically nothing goes to master without a review. Even if it was paired on, we'll still like at least open a poll and like.
I opened a pull request today for I10 string changes. Like that's like just we changed some text in a file. It's like I don't know, did I misspell something?
Every time a lot of the times when I open a pull, I'm like, this is stupid and too small for a pull request. Someone makes a comment. I'm like, oh, that's a good point. Yeah, we should do that. And it's like, okay, I guess it was worth it.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel silly with those ones sometimes, but I mean, it takes somebody 2 seconds to look at it and be like, yep, it's good. And every once in a while, they do catch something like, you used the wrong "it's" here. That kind of thing. Yeah.
So. Worth doing. Cool. So I guess the code review does not take a different format when pair programming.
Nope.
Cool. Thanks, Crispin. Good question. Very solid. All right. So Daniel asks, how do you determine how long you do pair programming? Is it per feature, a time length, or other parameter? Also, how do you choose who to pair with? I don't have any set guidelines in my head. It's kind of ad hoc. I think for me, it probably tends to be per feature. If it's a feature that I think is a good candidate for it. It's like the more worried something makes me, or like the less I feel like I know about it, the more likely I am to suggest that we pair on it. So I guess for me, it's kind of feature-ish. But also like if we've paired for 4 hours in a day, I'm kind of like, let's finish this separately. Because like after a certain point, it's really hard to keep pairing.
I'll do a lot of that. Like especially where if you think something's going to be difficult and then you get into it and you're like, this actually wasn't that difficult. And there'll just be like a little like, do you have enough information to proceed here? Can I go back to doing what I was doing separately? And I think the other interesting thing to note is like, I am not a fantastic pair programmer. Like there are certain people I can kind of click with and we're on the same wavelength and there isn't a lot of spoken communication back and forth and we're just kind of doing something. But with other people, I find it more difficult for whatever reason. And it's just something I know about myself. So about 4 hours in a day is a lot of pair programming for me to have to do.
For sure.
I've done it before where I've done an entire day of pairing and I'm always just completely, totally exhausted. After that.
Yeah, I think you have to be sensitive that it's a human endeavor and like there are people involved. And so sometimes like if you go an hour, you're like, you know what, that's good. Let's stop. And just realize that's okay.
Yeah. How do we choose how to pair with? I generally don't. Usually I'm working on a small enough team that the choice is basically made. There's 1 or 2 other people and they're working on something they need help with or I need some help and that's it. I do a lot of like, I wouldn't necessarily call it pairing so much as like shoulder surfing with somebody. Like I'm stuck. Can you give me an idea here kind of thing? So like I was on a project with Chris Toomey And we did a lot of that where it would just be like, he would be sitting next to me and I just kind of reach over and tap his desk to be like, hey, when you have a second, take your headphones off and come talk to me.
Yep.
That kind of thing. So we had a good relationship with that. So that might not rise to the level of pair programming, but that's kind of what I'm more comfortable with.
Yeah, we do that a lot too. Just like, can you take a look at this and see if this makes sense? Or like, how do you feel about this approach?
Right.
Like those little sort of lightweight check-ins are kind of nice. Hello and welcome to everyone that's watching. We're up to 11 viewers. That's cool. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A app. I feel like my mic is peaking. I'm gonna put it away from my face. Yeah, put them in the Q&A app and we'll try to get to them. Russell's asking, is metaprogramming in Ruby a junior developer skill or an advanced developer skill? That's a loaded question. Is metaprogramming in Ruby a junior? I wouldn't really call it either. Like it's a language feature, and I think like most language features, you probably learn how to use it better as you get more advanced and you see more applications, or like you sort of get a better sense for like when it's a good fit. But I wouldn't say like stay away from metaprogramming because it's too hard for junior developers.
No, that's not what I would say as well. Like I think I certainly used it a lot more when I was a junior programmer because like it's a cool feature of a language that, I'd never really used a language that had such metaprogramming ability. And so, everything was a chance to do metaprogramming for me. And then over time, I think like with any new thing you learn as a junior developer or as a developer, right? Over time, you really kind of find the right usages for it. So I think it's important for a junior developer to know what metaprogramming is and how to use it.
Yep.
And then they'll discover what the right uses for it are over time. And you can give some guidance on that. But
yeah, I wouldn't hold off on learning it or like be afraid of it. Be aware that like most new hammers, when you get them, everything looks nail-like for a while. And so realize that that's probably going to happen. And so just ask yourself like, okay, now that I've applied metaprogramming here, is the code better? Is it more understandable? If someone else were looking at this, would they still be able to figure out what's going on?
I would say I do find that in my own code, I do very little metaprogramming at all.
So you say that, but like you use Rails, right? So
right. That's what I was going to say. But I use things that are built on a lot of metaprogramming.
Tons of it. Yeah, I think metaprogramming can be a super good fit for like library tools, basically gems. But I don't do very much of my own client code either.
There's a couple things where like I'll realize I can make something a lot simpler if I use send, which I don't know if you would consider metaprogramming.
I guess so.
So there'll be times where I sneak that in, but for the most time, I'm not like programmatically defining methods or something like that.
Yeah, same. Right. Or like I can define like four RSpec expectations with one thing. It's like, I'll often just write them out.
Yep, exactly. But like Factory Girl is another implementation, I believe, another like library that probably is built on
tons of it.
A lot of metaprogramming. I worked on that with Josh during my interview with thoughtbot, and it was super like I was trying not to let on that I was super intimidated, but I was like, oh my God, what are we doing?
Yeah. Interesting. Well, you fooled him enough.
Yeah, I guess.
Cool. Excellent. Thanks, Russell. So Dave, let's have some more questions, by the way. Please put your questions in the Q&A app. Dave is asking, which design patterns do you find most useful? The small classes.
Yeah, small class.
The single responsibility design pattern.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for design when somebody says design pattern, the things that come to mind are like Gang of Four type things. And I don't know, maybe this is bad, but I just don't think that way usually. It may end up that the solution I implemented like resembles one pattern in that book, and I know it because I've read that book or I've seen other implementations of it. But I don't tend to think that way. I tend more to think of like, I want a small class. I want one responsibility. I want a few lines in this method. That kind of thing is what I'm focusing on usually.
Yeah.
How about you?
Same, probably. I guess, I mean, of the things, maybe I reach for decorator kind of somewhat frequently.
Yeah, I do more and more of that because of the whole small single responsibility thing kind of driving me to that.
Right, exactly. So I feel like solid kind of pushes you towards certain things, like using decorators a fair amount, using factories somewhat. And so I sort of, I'm like you, I come at it from the point of view of how are my classes designed? And then sometimes they'll end up as, classical Gang of Four patterns.
Right. I do really like when I get into a situation where I can do a strategy pattern. For some reason, that's like, I really feel like, oh, strategy pattern here.
Yeah,
like,
I never think about
we had an app where there were various ways you could pay for a reservation you were making, right? And so there were both, like, I was like, oh, we'll just do these strategies and we'll have a factory that based on what you pass in, picks the right strategy, and then you call the method on it. I was like, wow, that was super fun and design pattern-y. But it wasn't like I set out at the beginning, like I'm going to use the strategy pattern for this. It just kind of fell out of the thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you become familiar with these patterns.
And that's where the design patterns came from too, right? It was just like someone's like, how do we solve this problem? And they solved that same way a few times. And like they were like, hey, what if we called this a thing?
Right. I forget where I read this. Maybe it was Small Talk Best Practice Patterns, where it's like a pattern is a decision an expert makes over and over again kind of thing, or multiple times.
Exactly. They're not invented, they're distilled.
Yes.
Right? Like yeah. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Oh, Crispin again. Crispin asks, on code reviews, once more, how does it work on a project or team? Do you usually have a specific project lead handle most of the reviews? Do you keep the reviews within the project team, or are they just focused on ensuring general quality? So we don't generally have a project lead, although you've had some client projects where you've kind of ended up as lead. Yeah. But we think of everyone as doing code review. Like everyone, we're a pretty flat hierarchy. And so there's like no, like you are the main reviewer of this thing. Right. Except for cases where maybe like if I was doing a pull request on like clearance, for example, and you maintain that, like you would, I wouldn't want to merge it without you having at least seen it, for example. But generally on our projects, I think of everyone kind of taking a turn and being able to review at any point. Right.
I think having like one person or a subset of people be the people who are doing like, whose opinion in code review carries more weight is in general is an anti-pattern. Like you want to have everybody involved because, again, I talk about this in my talk, but like the idea of code review, yes, it's going to help you with quality, but like the real benefit from it that I see is that it's gives you an avenue for like a very good technical discussion in black and white rather than an abstract, like in your application. Yeah. So everybody being involved in that and asking good questions, coming to a good solution is more valuable to me than like having a senior developer be like, this meets my quality standards. And that's important too. That's definitely a part of it. But I try to stay focused on having a discussion to arrive at the best solution rather than necessarily quality. Like I'm not going to ignore if I think there's a bug somewhere. But
totally. Yeah. And so second part of that was, do you keep reviews within the project team, or are they just focused on ensuring general quality? I don't understand how those two things are the opposite.
I've had questions similarly, like do you review changes across teams? Like, and that happens occasionally with smaller teams, especially. But I think having a built-up context around an application makes a lot of sense. Yeah. But I have talked to a couple of places that have like they have one app, but they have 3 teams that work on various parts of the app, kind of thing, and they find it super useful to maybe not necessarily do a review before something gets merged. Like don't hold up something getting merged so that you can have somebody on another team review it, but have those people on the other team constantly like reviewing even closed pull requests just to kind of like see how other teams are doing it, that kind of thing. We don't have that experience here. We generally work in much smaller teams, but
cool. Thanks, Crispin.
Questions, more questions.
Ask more questions. Our question queue is empty. And so instead, Derek is going to have to talk about what he had for breakfast.
I had to go to the dentist this morning.
Oh, God. I know you're very anti-dentist.
I'm anti-dentite, yeah.
Yeah. Did it go okay?
No, it didn't. It took several shots of Novocaine to get me anywhere near numb enough to have the dental work I needed to have done. Yeah.
But has it worn off since?
Yeah. Now you're good. 100%. Yeah.
People with red hair are apparently like more.
Yes, this is a thing.
Right?
I told my dentist, yes, people with red hair, there is some preliminary studies out there that say that I can't believe we're talking about that. That say that
you said ask us anything.
Yeah, we are less susceptible to Novocaine and other types of other painkillers of that type. And I mentioned this to my dentist after the first round of Novocaine didn't work, and she said that she had also read this research. I don't know if it means she read like the same BuzzFeed article I read,
right? Exactly,
or if she actually read the research.
You won't believe what happens to this ginger. All right, we have some real questions. Thank God. Crispin says, Derek, can you give a rundown on your programming background? Did you get started with Ruby?
Sure. This will be fun.
Tell us everything.
I started doing web development, writing HTML pages for myself as jokes, like when I was in like 14 or 15 years old. So I'm old, so that's like 20 years ago now. So I started doing that. I got a job in college doing Perl development for like the computer lab people. They needed to have a website that like ran some
CGI.
Aspects. Yeah, CGI.
Nice.
So I did Perl for a while, did ASP, C#. That like I was in the Microsoft family. Java. I've done Java.
Is that why sometimes you just like zone out and look really far away, and give a flashback and start sweating.
Yeah, that's basically it. And then after I did a lot of JavaScript, like I did a heavy JavaScript stuff, and then finally came to Ruby after that. Ruby has probably been the language I've stuck with the longest. C# I was doing for a long time as well. So those are my two strongest languages, I would say.
Do you miss any of that stuff that you like, the tools or?
I miss Visual Studio a lot.
Yeah,
that was super good IDE. I don't use an IDE doing Ruby because I don't think they provide the same advantages that they do in Visual Studio. But like IntelliSense is what Microsoft has in Visual Studio, where you just start typing and you type like a capital letter, and it's like, well, I know all the classes, and I have all of their documentation. So like you can be like, it's probably something called like web request or request. And so you start typing REQ, and it's like, yeah, here's a request. And then here's the documentation for it. And here's a sample usage of it all in like this giant tooltip that you can read.
Yeah.
And there are just great static analysis tools as well. Like there's IntelliJ, people make one for, I can't remember what, ReSharper is what they call it. It's basically like you write some code in Visual Studio, and it's like, I can write that better for you if you would like. Would you like me to? And you're like, yeah. And then you right click and it does it. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. But it's an entirely different experience than using something like Vim, right? I just said you right click on something. You don't right click on anything.
Tooltips.
Tooltips, but
nice. Thanks, Crispin.
Let's talk about this one.
Yeah, I gotta ask this. So Sage is asking, did I have my boxing match yet? Yes, I did. I lost in the first round. Both my contacts got knocked out. But I decided to continue anyway, partially blind, and went 3 rounds, which is the full length, and I lost by decision, which I agree with. I lost.
Was it unanimous?
I don't. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess it was. It was. Yeah, it was a unanimous decision that I got my butt kicked a little bit. I gave him some. I got some good shots in there too, but he definitely won. But
any bruising or anything?
My nose still hurts. Like it's still sore right here. It's kind of red. Well, you can't really see it, but it's still a little bit red right here. And it's pretty sore. And I can't quite breathe out of this nostril over here, really. Like right towards the end of the fight, like right towards the end of the third
Sounds like
round,
a problem. That was a couple weeks ago.
I got he caught me really good right on the nose, and it just started bleeding like crazy.
Oh,
which is kind of a hell of a way to end it, you know?
It's boxing.
Yeah, it's boxing.
Yeah, now you feel like you did it, right?
That's what happens. Yeah. So they take before and after pictures, and so the before pictures like, hey, and the after pictures like holding a rag to my face as blood pours down it.
What are you going to do it again?
I think I am actually. I'm going back to going to try a different boxing gym. Because clearly the gym was the problem.
Yeah,
I didn't win.
It was the gym's fault. Your contacts
fell out. So I'm gonna try a different gym. Actually, the gym my opponent goes to. But we're buddies now. Actually, I emailed him and said congrats on the fight and all that. And so he's like, yeah. I was like, I'm gonna come to your gym. He's like, yeah, sounds good. So we're gonna probably do some friendly sparring as opposed to trying to kill each other.
Don't try to break my nose.
Yeah. So I think I'm gonna do some more of it because I did a lot of things wrong in the fight, which of course you're going to. It's like your first time. But there's a lot of stuff I'd love to be able to do well and actually fight at the level that I'm able to, as opposed to half as good because I'm
Did you
so much
did you remember to jab and breathe?
Sort of. Yeah.
You jabbed every once in a while, and every once in a while you're like, I haven't breathed in a while.
Yeah.
Let me do that.
The context is everyone tells you or told me when I was like, I have this fight, they're like, jab and breathe. Everyone who had boxed before, keep jabbing, keep breathing. And so that was my nickname, was Ben Jab and Breathe Orenstein. And
what was his nickname?
Sort of helped. He didn't have one.
Oh,
that I heard.
Ooh.
Yeah, he didn't. He was too cool for that.
Too cool. Yeah.
Too cool. But he won. So hey. But thanks for asking. It was a hell of an experience. I really kind of enjoyed it. Even losing it was really fun. This question is here to troll you. I think Tom did this one. With all the time you spent on Sean on the podcast, what is your favorite Pokemon?
Is Pikachu a Pokemon?
I don't know. Probably.
Yeah. Yep, Tom says it is. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Pikachu. He's the yellow one, right? Lightning bolts.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
I don't know. Does he have lightning bolts or something?
I think he does.
Okay. Yeah.
I think he makes noises and stuff.
That's all I got on Pokemon.
Awesome. So judging by the fact that we're talking about boxing and Pokemon, the question queue is empty. Please ask us stuff.
Yeah, whatever you want. Anything.
Yeah, it's literally ask us anything.
More dental questions. Fine.
Derek is an expert in internationalization.
Yeah.
We have questions about tea helpers and whatnot. Oh, thank goodness. Jerry, you're our savior. Jerry's asking, what approaches would you take to break a large code base down? We have a single Rails web app, but our team is getting large enough that we want to split into more self-contained teams of 3 or 4 to move a bit faster. It's a good question.
It is.
So one thing I've seen work well, like I'm glad that you're thinking of breaking the teams up and not the app up.
Well, it sounds like you might be though.
Break a large code base down. So Derek is going to have some good thoughts on this.
Yeah.
I'll share some of mine preliminary ones, which is be careful about breaking a single app into many. It's like, oh, we have this big monolith, and instead we've done a lot of work and traded it for a poorly structured set of microservices, kind of.
Right.
It's actually really hard, I think, to split up an app well into service-oriented architecture and reap enough benefits for the additional complexity that you now have. Like now there's 3 apps you have to spin up if you want to check if things work, and do we stub the remote one, and what shares databases, and blah, blah. There's a lot of really hard questions because now you're building just a more distributed system. Right. You already have a distributed system because you have a client server, and now the server is multiple pieces. So I think there's it's really tough to get enough benefit from that and not make the wrong decision, draw the line wrong. Oh, actually, no, this data needs to be actually over here. We've screwed this up. It's like we on Upcase, we split out when we did the exercise system, we built a brand new app for it. I wouldn't say, if I could snap my fingers and have it folded back into the Upcase app, I would definitely do it. As an alternative, you can create some namespaces, create some modules and things like that. Yep. I've seen that used to really good effect. It's just like, okay, if there are reasonable logical areas, like if you think you found a good thing to split out into an app, start by just like making an app models, whatever, or like however you want to split it up, like app models admin, for example. And then just put everything under that admin namespace for a while, namespace the controllers, namespace the models and the views, and see if you actually have done a good job of drawing a circle around something that is really self-contained. And then maybe later split that out, but do as a first step, break it up. And then you can say, you guys only touch the stuff that's over in these directories, we touch the stuff in these directories, and blah, blah, blah.
See how it goes for a while. Yeah. That's my experience as well. I would say that like if doing it in response to team size is actually one of the things I think you need to consider when you're thinking about breaking up an app. Like there is going to come a time when you have a big enough team that everybody working on the same app is going to be a problem, right? There's going to be more merge conflicts and things like that.
So,
I mean,
merge conflicts are easy.
But then there's also a matter of like, oh, well, you wanted to deploy this part of the application that you think is done. This isn't really stable over here. We haven't done QA on that. Like when you get to a certain scale, this matters.
So you think breaking an app up in response to team size changes is a good thing?
I think it's one of the inputs into the decision to do that.
Yeah, that would scare me. Because that's not like it's like, oh, we haven't decided that the architecture just dictates that this would be better this way. It's like, we just got too many people.
Right. Then it becomes a problem of like, okay, is it a good technical thing to do? Like, then the technical stuff that you talked about comes into play. And I think like whatever pains you're having at, I don't know, 8, 12, 16 people, it sounds like, I'm guessing based on what your question was, whatever pains you're having there in your current app, think of what that would be like if you threw a bunch of HTTP calls in the middle. Right.
Bunch of latency and unreliability.
Right. So it's going to get harder. Like it's not going to make anything easier in the short term. It's actually going to be significantly harder, and it requires a lot more expertise, really. Like
totally.
I've worked on 2 different projects that I would say were aiming towards having a service-oriented architecture, and neither one of them worked particularly well as a service-oriented architecture. Both the apps might hang together okay, but like as somebody working on it, it was frustrating to be involved there. They still required people to make like changes on both ends at the same and like synchronize them, and there's all sorts of problems that come along with that.
So Jerry says self-contained teams, which I get like the idea, but also like the apps are going to depend on each other almost certainly.
Right.
And so like it's nice that your team can like this, team A is always working on app A, but app A is going to depend on B and C almost certainly. And so there will be these dependencies of like, okay, we need to make sure that your API on this end still responds to the way we think it did. And like, we might have to fake out your thing over here, or like we need this data from about this user. So like the teams are kind of self-contained, but it's more like they're localized onto a single app, but they still have dependencies across the teams.
Right.
And the apps.
We had a lot of good discussions. I can plug the podcast again. We had a lot of good discussions on Bike Shed about this. If you look back through, if you go to bikeshed.fm, the episode we did with DHH, we talked about service-oriented architectures. And we talked about it a couple times before then as well. If you look through the show notes for the previous episodes, where I talked about the specific pains I was having working on an app that I thought was prematurely broken out into services.
Nice.
Because if you get that decision wrong, it's very, very painful. So you have to, like, if you decide where you're drawing your line, it's very painful. So I think a good first step is exactly what you said, where you draw some module boundaries, like break out a namespace and then look for like how many times are we going across this namespace? Because if you're going across that namespace, now if you were to take those namespaces and put them in different apps, that's an HTTP call every time you do that.
Totally. Yep. Cool. If you're just joining us, please submit questions via the Q&A app, and we will answer them. And they can be anything. We'll answer them all and vote up the questions that you want to see answered, and we will prioritize that way. Dave Moore is asking, have either of you spent any time freelancing or doing contract work? What were your experiences? I've done a little tiny bit of this. I did a little bit of Clojure freelancing, and that's it.
I've done no freelancing and no contracting.
Yeah.
I have no experience here. I'm always like tempted to be, especially when I was younger and didn't have a family and things that I needed to attend to after work. I was always tempted to like, I should find some side work to do, and I could make some extra money and get some exposure to do, like, especially when I was trying to get involved in Rails.
Yep.
Like I could do more Rails than my day job lets me do, kind of thing. So I was always tempted by that, but always also daunted by like finding the right clients. What if I can't do whatever they want me to do?
Yeah. I had the sort of similar motivation, which is I wanted to write some Clojure, and so I found somebody that wanted to pay me to do it. And it was recent. It was about a year ago, and I avoided some mistakes by being aware of the thoughtbot process and like the experience that I've had as a consultant here. And then I made some other mistakes that I could have potentially avoided if I had known more. So it's kind of a mixed bag. It was like pretty good. It went better than probably if it had been my normal first contracting project, but also still I made like some classic mistakes that you just shouldn't do that, I know more about now. Like it was like, oh, like we're spending too much money. And I was like, oh, well, I guess the solution for that is that I should cut my rate. And I was like, why did I suggest that? That was
He'd already agreed to pay me X.
He'd already agreed. I could like flex on the scope, do less. And he was just saying like, it's too much per week. So like, okay, I'll just do fewer hours. But I was like, oh, well, what if you just cut my rate? And
what if I do the same amount of work for less money?
Why did I say that? So, it was a mixed experience.
Yeah.
Crispin, you are killing it, man. Any thoughts on the future of Ruby, i.e. where you'd like to see it improve or evolve? For example, I think Matt's was discussing adding optional type declarations or any features from other languages you think would fit with Ruby. Any thoughts on the future of Ruby?
I'm probably the wrong person for this. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about like the design of programming languages as much as I think about whether or not I enjoy using them. And I really enjoy using Ruby. I think that in my experiences with Haskell, like I have very limited experience doing Haskell, just like exercises kind of thing. And in those experiences, I've liked the strong type system, but I think if you were to tack a type system onto Ruby, it would change it quite a bit. Although I guess they're saying optional type system.
Yep.
I don't know how that would work. I've seen the same articles referencing his RubyConf talk from 2014, I think, where he mentioned having some sort of, for Ruby 3.0, having some sort of like optional static typing. But
yeah. Any thoughts on the future of Ruby? So I think first of all, Ruby will never die in the sense that like once a programming language becomes popular enough, it becomes immortal. So I think Ruby will never. You can still write Ruby. You'll be able to write Ruby 20 years from now, I think. You'll be able to write Rails apps 20 years from now, probably, if you want to. Like there are people still writing COBOL. So like there will always be these giant legacy things.
Those people make a lot of money too.
And you can make a lot of money, right? Because eventually, supply and demand shift certain ways, and there's just not a lot of people that can do it. So with that caveat that Ruby is literally, almost literally immortal as a language at this point. I think in 10 or 15 years, no one will be writing it in a sense. In the sense that it won't be a mainstream super popular language, because I think functional programming is literally, I just think it's a better way to build systems. And I'm saying this talking kind of out of my ass because I haven't done nearly as much functional programming as I have OO. But what I have done and what I've seen and what I've talked to other people whose opinions I respect, it's like this does actually seem like a better way to build systems. I also feel similarly about immutable data. And I'm up in the air about type systems.
Right.
I think type systems kind of are interesting and have potentially great and potentially maybe not as good. I'm not sure. But so I don't think you can take Ruby and turn it into a functional, like really functional, immutable data having typed language really without just bolting all these pieces that never quite work. And so I think something that takes that approach earlier on, like maybe Clojure, like maybe Haskell, will probably supplant it at some point.
Yeah.
I can't believe it just said, I think Haskell is going to supplant Ruby. I wouldn't bet on that.
There's a lot of people who want it to.
I wouldn't
at
put a
least
lot
here.
of money on it.
I mean, I keep coming back to, at every step, like somebody asked earlier, like what my progression was with programming.
Mm-hmm.
And at every step along that progression, like when I moved from writing HTML to writing Perl that would write some HTML for me,
Mm-hmm.
to doing ASP, which I enjoyed, to doing, C# or Java, like at every step along that way, I thought I was getting, like, it was pretty quickly, I was like, I like this better than whatever I was doing before.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to do all this forever now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Except for when I did JavaScript. But that was like, well, this is, I mean, I want to do an app that is like this, and JavaScript is the way to do that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I did Ruby, I was like, well, I like this even better than C#, and I liked C# a decent amount. And I haven't hit upon anything where like I've done more Haskell than I did Ruby when I decided I really loved Ruby. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I do like Haskell, but it hasn't like had that thing go off where I was like, I have to write everything in this. And that might be because the paradigm is entirely different and I have to get more used to it, that kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
we talked about that on the Bike Shed, episode 10 with Pat Brisbane.
How many times can we plug the Bike Shed? Cool. Yeah. So there are some features that I think are really interesting. And like so I said earlier, I think Ruby will not be the main thing, and I hope I'm right. Like, I almost don't care what it is, but like if programming gets to the point where it takes 15 years to have another language that's really good be like a dominant player, that's terrible, right? Like, hopefully things are going to go away and new things that are better will come and replace them.
I do think it's easy for us, like in the position we're at, to say like, oh, this is going to go away and this is going to, like, as Ruby developers, we talk about how, like, remember when we all did Java? Like, ha, 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 ha. There are millions of people doing Java.
Way more people than Ruby.
Right. Way more people. And it's still wildly popular. And
yeah,
like, so I think Ruby will be wildly popular for quite some time. It's just that
totally agree. That's what I mean by it's immortality.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Like, Java is also immortal. It will be around forever, effectively.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Sage again. JavaScript seems to have gained a lot of traction lately as a backend service. I know Node.js. Maybe it's just a lot of hype, but how do you think it will affect the future of Rails jobs? I think it will affect it not very much beyond you're going to need to know some JavaScript because it's wildly popular.
Yeah.
I don't see Node.js taking over the place of Rails on the server.
I don't either, but I see lots of people that I consider to be smart saying things like, it's over Node.js 1. And I'm like, well, like Jeremy Ashkenas will like tweet something about that. I hope it was Jeremy and I'm not misquoting him, but and
like, meaning one for like what people are going to write the server side with?
Right. Like, it's JavaScript and it's Node and it's concurrent. Like, they talk about how like you can do more like concurrency. It's simpler. And I've done Node apps once. Enough.
That's plenty.
Enough and for long enough for me to realize that I was trying to reinvent Rails the entire time I was doing it. And I didn't understand why. And the whole like being able to write JavaScript on the back end and on the front end, and isn't this great? It's the same language, but it's not. Like, the libraries are entirely different from what you can write on the front end, and the support for things is entirely different between what you can write on the front end and back end. So you still have this context shift that you're doing. So I don't see the value there.
Yeah.
I hope the answer is that it doesn't affect Rails jobs at all, because I don't really like Node and I don't like NPM. And as much as I like Rails and Bundler and Ruby Gems and that whole ecosystem speaks better to me.
Yeah. I get why people want to write the same language on the front end and the back end, kind of, but like, if it weren't JavaScript that ran in the browsers, I don't think anyone would like JavaScript. Like, and that's like too strong a statement, but like, I feel like it's kind of a little bit of an accident of history that we have to write JavaScript to make a browser do interesting things. And taking that and being like, oh, well, let's write everything in this now is kind of like, oh, but there's a lot of problems with this language. It's getting better. Like, every version makes it better. Right. But I don't know. I'm not a huge fan.
I think it's more likely that Rails and Ruby change in response to any incursions from Node, right? And I think we're starting to see that with Rails, where DHH unveils Action Cable, which we still haven't seen. But
what is an Action Cable?
I listened to episode 14 of the Bike Shed.
Ding.
It is.
I'm behind. I actually do listen.
It is an abstraction on WebSockets, right? And the idea that like, oh, we can do this in Ruby now. You don't need to have you don't need Node to do these like really dynamic things.
So it's basically like shoving data into the browser without like keeping a persistent connection open.
Yeah, kind of basically
Rails sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where DHH sees this going. whether or not that's successful or something else comes up, I haven't seen a problem yet that I would prefer to solve with Node than Rails.
That's a nice diplomatic way of saying it. Okay. So Jerry asks, he's jumping off on a recent weekly iteration in the introduction of the Rails API gem. Question is, what are your thoughts about introducing a JS MVC to a Rails app? If it were greenfield, would you start with Ember or stay with Rails views? That's a good question. What do you think?
Rails views for life.
Rails views for life. Yeah. You've done Ember too, right?
I haven't done Ember. I've done Angular.
Okay. Yeah.
I have not done Ember. I would be interested in doing that, but I still think that staying server side for as long as possible is going to be easier to develop, easier to debug, and it's going to be more, I don't know, cross-platform, I guess I would say. Like, you're not going to worry about how it's going to perform on a phone versus how it's going to perform on a desktop PC, because you're doing all the processing for things on the server.
Given that, let's say your app just keeps accumulating bits of jQuery all over the place, and you're mutating the DOM and all that. I mean, there's a certain point where like, it'd be nice if this were a little more structured.
Right. So I would say wait till you feel that.
And then use React.
And then use, sure. I mean, I've seen Chris Toomey talk about React enough to be like, oh, that's interesting. And I've seen, we have people here like Matt Sumner and Blake who are really into Ember. Yeah. Right. So like those things are interesting to me. I've done enough Angular to know I didn't really care for it.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in trying those things, but I think I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm not good at drawing that line.
So I touched on this earlier, but like, so we're building distributed systems in web programming where you have a server and you have a client, and that's already like pretty complicated. But if you do almost all the work on the server, it's less complicated. It's sort of less distributed in a way. But if you have stuff running in both places, the world gets, and like they talk in these like bidirectionally, that becomes a much more complicated thing to reason about and to build, I think. So Rails views for life as much as possible. If you really, really, really need that stuff that JavaScript gives you, I think there's probably a point, like I would start with like simple jQuery stuff. And then if you really are doing a lot of it, then look at what your client side options are. But I would give a really strong look at React before I would look at another MVC. Oh my God, it's MVC everywhere. Is MVC really the best fit for everything? Maybe not. Take a look at React and look at other stuff too. Look at Ember.
Yeah.
But
be
aware you're about to tread somewhere that can kind of suck.
I actually am. And I've become a little more vocal about this recently, but I embarrassingly enjoyed doing RJS, which is like Rails JavaScript or remote JavaScript or something, which is like the ability in Rails to send a JavaScript response that will then be executed on the client and execute some JavaScript on the client.
Yep.
I get a lot of mileage out of that for like doing dynamic paging for like load more, like infinite scroll type things, or that kind of stuff. That's what I sprinkle in, and then I'll go to like, oh, we need some jQuery here.
And why is that good? Because the server has the data it needs to generate the JavaScript to have the client run it?
Yeah, I guess. Like, it's easy. It's like you don't need to worry so much about the eventing, because the eventing is the request response.
Okay.
Right.
So the client makes the request, gets the JavaScript back to execute that.
So I would say like, and I was talking to Ian about this. He's on a project where ended up having to do more. Like, he got in that situation where it was like, oh, pretty standard Rails app. Oh, look, I'm doing a lot of JavaScript. What do I do? And he moved to like making sure that a lot of his JavaScript was happening in classes, and like, don't bind some behavior directly to like a click event. Bind that click event to trigger some event in another class, or trigger some method in another class. So you can like get more reuse and like avoid that jQuery soup. And so that's kind of the approach he took on that app. And I think that was particularly interesting.
Cool. I think we beat that one to death.
Yeah.
All right. Crispin asks, at the point you guys are at in your careers, how do you go about getting better at what you do? Work with people that are better than you.
Yeah, or differently skilled.
Differently skilled, yeah, which happens automatically. Everyone is differently skilled, and so like, the Venn diagrams never completely overlap. Right. That to me is that to me is true for all skill levels. Like, always be working with great people, and you will just be your game will naturally be increased to that level.
I would also say, like, coming here from where I used to work at Akamai to coming to thoughtbot, where I get a new project every 6 months or so, right? Has also kind of helped, because I get exposed to a lot of different types of things. Like one day I'm working on a Rails app, next day I'm working on an Angular app, and working with people who had done Angular before, but I had not. So that was like, again, working with differently skilled people, but also on different things. And then I go back to like a more established Rails app, to a greenfield Rails app, to some other JavaScript thing, like getting to bounce around a lot and getting exposure to a lot of things, and also a lot of different teammates.
Yeah.
Kind of, that's one of the advantages of, I feel like, working here and working in a consulting setting like we do.
Yeah.
When you're with a larger company, I think you need to be wary of like always working on the same thing and trying to move around. So I did that as well. I worked at Akamai, trying to like, okay, I've done this for a couple of years. Is there something else I can work on now?
Yeah.
So moving around like that, always like code reviews, I think, are a great way, because you're reading code. Like you can look at what somebody else on other teams are doing, like constantly be reading code, keeping up on like whatever Sandy Metz is talking about.
Yeah.
Follow that.
Yeah. Pay attention to Sandy Metz. That's good advice.
That type of thing.
I will also throw in sort of the caveat that like I am not improving at nearly the rate I used to. Like I think I'm a somewhat better programmer than 6 months ago, but like probably not nearly as much as 3 years ago with a 6 months difference. So like you're naturally going to sort of slow down, I think. And for me, I'm okay with that because my focus is shifting a little bit. Like I'm more aware of like running a SaaS business kind of thing. Like those skills, those skills are much weaker and getting better at a much faster rate, like my programming used to be. And now I'm honestly like less interested in more programming ability. Like it's still kind of loosely interesting to me, and I still like programming a lot, but like I don't quite have the same drive of like I got to read all these books, I got to try all these new things. I'm a little more curmudgeonly and a little bit less like my limiting factor is not my ability to like write great code anymore.
Right.
Like the things for achieving what I want is not really held back by code ability now.
And some of that might have been visible in our answer to like whether or not you should be doing client-side framework. We were both kind of like, nah, Rails, just hang on to it.
Don't do it. Right, exactly. Yeah, right. You asked the two of the older guys at thoughtbot. It's like, what do you think? And they're like, oh, no, you don't need this. Kids these days and their JavaScript.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think that's natural too. Like even if you were still really interested in getting better at programming, like the rate of improvement is going to change. Not always necessarily going down, but you're going to go through swells, like where you like you are plateauing for a little while, and then you break through and you start improving, but not at the same rate you were improving because there's less ground for you to cover.
Sure, or maybe this is how the beginning of the end, where like like I'm stopped getting better, and so now like within like 3 or 4 years I'll be out of date, and then with like 6 or 7 years I'll be unemployed.
I always wonder about that too. Like, and by like clinging to Ruby so long, am I missing what's coming next? Like what's going on?
Exactly. Well, I still think Rails is state of the art. Like if you're going to build a web application, I don't think there's anything better still. So I think we're okay for now.
Okay. All right.
We got to keep our eyes open.
Let me know.
That's the thing. You have to keep paying attention because eventually it's like, oh, you're still writing Rails applications? Seriously? Like there'll be a day where people say that. And so you gotta be aware. Watch out for that stuff. God, I hope it's not JavaScript that replaces it. I will have to leave the industry. Daniel Nolan, who I thought was David Nolan at first, but anyway, if you have a project that requires an API to power an iOS app, and it also needs a web app, period. Cool. Would you just use Rails to build an API and then build the web app as a client app to use the API? Have you run into this? Have you done this exact situation?
I have done that exact situation, not for an iOS app, but I have done the situation at a previous employer where we built an API and then built the web app on top of the API, and then other things also used the API.
Yep.
It's a reasonable approach.
Yeah.
It has like that same disconnect between the back end and the front end.
Yeah.
So it's a trade-off like everything, right? So you have to decide whether or not you're willing to do that trade-off. If you're in a situation where you've decided like, oh, the interactivity from JavaScript client apps is what I have to have here, right? I want this Ember, whiz-bang, whatever it is you're going to get out of that. Then
whiz-bang. You are old.
I want whatever it is, people say they get out of these Ember apps. Then like, yeah, you need an API for that, and then you're going to use the API for your iOS app too. But I think that if you're building a web app for one experience, it's going to be slightly different than the experience you're going to deliver on the phone, probably.
Yep.
And that may need different API endpoints.
Yep.
So be careful about putting too many eggs in the whole, like, I'm going to build this one API and I'm going to use it for the web app, and then it's going to be the same API for the iOS backend.
I'm totally skeptical of this approach. I would build the app with a separate API and have the Rails views be different, or the Rails part be different. To me, the place that you want to share is not share the API, it's share the business logic.
Yeah.
Like I want the API and the Rails and the the API and the iOS app to have shared business logic. And so we'll put that part in like the Ruby code. The API is just a way of accessing the shared business logic. The Rails part is just the way of accessing the shared business logic. Right. I think you're going to run to the, like, I just feel like I would anticipate a lot of situations that you touched on where there's a difference. It's like, oh, well, on the phone, we want to do this. And then the Rails app, we should want to do this. Okay, so I guess we'll add a flag to the API that says it's from the phone, or like just.
And even just like the amount of data you want to pass back. Like on a mobile device, the latency is such a concern that like you want to pass back the minimal set of data that you possibly can. Whereas a desktop, you might not care.
Yeah.
And you might be able to expose some more features by passing more data that you might not want on the phone. So you're going to need a different API endpoint.
Yep.
Gets a little more complicated, I think. And that, like the current project I'm on, part of the reason they switched to like a service-oriented architecture was this desire to have like an API. So they have a Rails backend, which is an API, and they have a Rails front end, which is like the views, and they talk HTTP between them. And part of the desire was then like, oh, we could have a mobile app and it would just talk to that same thing.
Yeah.
The mobile app never materialized.
Yes, of course.
And so now there's these HTTP calls in the middle that are just like, why? What? Why?
It's wretched. It's wretched.
So yeah, be careful.
Yeah, be careful. I would stay away from it. I'd do what I said earlier. I stand by my answer. Dave asks, Ben, you mentioned that you were trying to expand your SaaS management knowledge. What resources do you enjoy most to gain knowledge around product management? That's a good question. I like the Intercom blog a lot. There's a site called SaaStr, SaaStr, which has like gathers up those articles of like how you can decrease churn by 30% and other such clickbaity things, or good, useful, actual stuff. For me, nothing has been quite as useful as trying to do it a lot and seeing what works and what doesn't.
It's always the case.
Right, always the case. So I don't actually actively read that much.
What about the Kathy Sierra book that you got?
Yeah.
Did you enjoy that?
That's a really good one. Yeah, that book is super good. So her book is called Badass Making Awesome Users, or Making Users Awesome. One of those. Something like that. That's awesome. That's really great.
Okay, cool.
I bought an extra copy for Chris, who's working on the Upcase team. I was like, this is read this.
Yeah, when you brought that over to Chris, I was like, oh, I've heard about that.
It's super good. It's super good. It's actually informed the feature we're working on right now for Upcase, which is these quiz-like things for giving people like sort of short bursts of knowledge, like, oh, I have 5 minutes before the train comes, like, can I actually get some knowledge in my head? Because she talks all about her view of expertise is that it's a sequence of moving small fine-grained skills from conscious necessary thought to do them to sort of automatic competence in them. Like an expert chooses the correct thing more frequently without thinking versus a new person who will choose the correct thing less frequently and requires a lot of thought. And so we're working on this feature which has kind of been informed by that book, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. But yeah, Dave, nothing helps like doing it. Like true for everything. Why is this sorted above these? You've been waiting a little while. Russell asks, have you used NeoVim? If so, what is your opinion of it? Haven't used it. Opinion of it is fairly positive. It seems like it's retaining compatibility with all the plugins that matter. And is making some really positive changes. So I kind of have it loosely on my maybe someday list of like, check out NeoVim and see if it works okay. Yeah,
I've seen some really cool things, but I have not used it myself either. But everybody that has kind of been tracking it everything I've heard is everybody's continually impressed by how fast it's moving. Like when it was announced, it was like, oh, that'll be like 5 years before anybody's going to be able to use that. But people are using it.
Yeah.
I haven't felt the need yet, but like some of the things I saw were like built-in shells, that kind of thing. I was like, ooh, that would be interesting.
Cool.
Like,
True.
And then maybe I'm not using Tmux. Maybe I'm just using Vim. And
right. True asynchrony also sounds good.
Yep. Yeah. Instead of like blocking in order to do a syntactic check of the file, it just does it while I'm doing something else.
Yep. That's pretty cool. It's an intriguing project. I hope it succeeds. I want it to succeed, and I should try it. I guess lend my support by actually using it and filing bugs and whatnot. So it's kind of loosely on my list. Replacing your editor is such like a throw away the world situation.
Hopefully it's still Vim.
Hopefully it's still Vim. So I guess it's kind of not like it usually is, but just this idea of replacing such a core piece of my workflow, like I'm not quite an early adopter on that kind of thing. So we'll see, but I'd like to try it at some point. You should try it, Jerry, or get back to us. Tell us what you think. Jerry's asking, more JavaScript, JS MVC versus views follow-up. Have you ever encountered client expectations about the app behavior, like responsiveness, or data intensity, or whatever, that would cause you to say, oh yeah, we're going to make this a rich client app? Not exactly. No, I guess I would say no. Sometimes clients say those words and they think they just mean fast.
Right.
And like fast can be done a lot of different ways without paying the JavaScript MVC penalty. I've never heard, I don't think I've ever heard a thing where I was like, yeah, this definitely has to be local client JavaScript.
And fast tends to be a lot easier to measure when you're doing server-side stuff as well than it is on client side. I haven't had that experience. The client-side app that I worked on in Angular was like, it was for a company that had decided like they were doing all Angular front-end apps. So like it was like, okay, well, I
You've
guess
seen the opposite, which is they're like everything must be JavaScript, and like it's like they haven't detailed any needs. They just they just know they want Ember.
That's the decision they made.
We just want Ember.
Right. So I've seen that.
Angular.
I've also seen. So what was some of the other questions? App behavior responsiveness. I mean, I know there are people that have built at thoughtbot have built Ember apps not because like the client came in asking for an Ember app, but just decided that like Ember makes sense here. Kind of thing. So
there are, I mean, I won't pretend there are no applications that don't make sense as client side JavaScript apps. There are certain things that I would hear like, oh, it needs to work offline. It's like, okay, well, yeah, that's a different, okay, we got to do certain things differently. Right. There are things that would push me in that direction, but not a lot of them.
I would say like, if you hear somebody saying, I want this to be if they're saying like, I want this to be a rich client app, because I need responsiveness or whatever the thing is, ask them, like, it's really important that you figure out what responsiveness means.
Totally.
Right. And it's going to be important whether or not you agree or you disagree, because it doesn't matter. You need to figure out what their expectation is. And maybe you can meet it by doing server-side stuff. Or maybe
super agree. Like a lot of people that are sort of lightly technical, but not very technical will come in and say like, well, it has to be responsive. And you're like, do you mean like when we shrink the browser window, it has to change this, or do you mean it has to be fast, and like under what conditions? And it's like they have sort of like a dangerous vocabulary. Like, well, I've heard about Ember, and this needs to be a client app. You're like, well, but why?
And even like if they say it needs to be fast, like how fast? What are you talking about? Like, are we talking 2 seconds?
Right,
a second and a half?
Can it cost twice as much money?
Right,
and to be that fast? Like,
right.
If it's 1 second versus 2 seconds, is that worth $500,000, or is it not worth that much money? Like, there's digging into that stuff is super important.
Yeah, I'm spending a lot of time reading about. Laura Hogan is somebody I follow on Twitter. She's a performance engineer or lead performance engineer over at Etsy. And she's always talking a lot about like measuring these types of things. And I want to get involved in that. And like I don't feel like we do a great job at like graphing performance over time, because it's not a concern we typically have.
Relic somewhere.
Yeah. So like I want to kind of get better at that type of stuff.
Yeah, let me know how that goes. Do it on Upcase. We need that. We need some help. The practice page is too slow. Sage Elliott asks, have you looked at the Volt framework? It uses Ruby for the server side and client side via Opal. With your experience, does that sound like a good idea or a bad one?
I have heard of it.
So Opal is Ruby that compiles into JavaScript, yes?
Yes. I've heard of it. I think I listened to like a Ruby Rogues episode podcast on it. I was listening to the conversation, but it wasn't like I'm going to run out and try this.
I like the idea of JavaScript as a compile target. I think that's totally the way forward. Is like you're going to write ClojureScript, or you're going to write whatever the Haskell thing that compiles into JavaScript is, or Opal or whatever. Like, I think that is the way. Like,
interesting.
Like, oh, you write JavaScript by hand?
See, I disagree.
That's interesting. Really?
Yeah, I disagree. I think I'm moving away from that thought and thinking like, yeah, JavaScript's a pain in the ass to write. Can I say ass?
Sure. No, but it's live, so oh well.
JavaScript's a pain to write, but like I can write it natively, and there's no like you showed actually some ClojureScript stuff running in the browser where you could debug it in Clojure. That was pretty impressive. Like that was the first time where I was like, oh, okay, because like I've moved away from like I don't want to write CoffeeScript anymore. I'm done with CoffeeScript.
Killing me.
If the choice is CoffeeScript or JavaScript. ES6. I'm writing with ES6, right?
Sure,
I'm going to be pre-compiling it with something, or pre-processing it with something.
Oh, okay. So you're okay writing something pre-processed.
Yeah, a little bit.
So
bit. I'm contradicting myself, but like if the choice is CoffeeScript or JavaScript, at this point I'm writing some flavor of JavaScript.
Yeah.
I haven't played with like things that are entirely different. Like I would say CoffeeScript is JavaScript-esque.
Sure.
Right.
You're not really using a different language with CoffeeScript. You're using some syntax differences, right?
Right.
I think I'm sticking to my guns. I think that so people used to write assembly, and then C came along. People are like,
what do I need this for?
Why? People, I don't need this. I can write the assembly directly by hand, and I can just debug it right there, right. And it's perfect. And yeah, this C, the thing it generates is like all ugly and not fast.
We keep getting higher level anyway, like even from C.
Things are going higher level, right? So like, if it's got to keep going like that, I think.
Okay. I don't have enough experience to say like I definitely wouldn't like that. But
so if we can't get a real runtime embedded in browsers, which doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon, let's write some stuff that compiles to JavaScript and check out ClojureScript. ClojureScript's pretty legit. Yeah. So yeah, short answer, Opal might be a good idea. We'll see. Come on, Google. What apps? Okay. Oh, we lost a question.
The question was, what do you look for in a junior? It was from something Ben Newton, maybe. Okay. I don't remember. We lost it, but what do you look for in the junior developer's profile, I think, or in a portfolio?
Okay. Passion.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. It's for me, it's a little bit less about technical. Well, I mean, technical skills matter, but for someone that's on the junior side, I want a sense that they are willing to go above and beyond. So like every junior developer has some sort of GitHub page with some stuff on it. So do something a little bit different than that. Like I want to see someone who like is hosting a podcast and like has a lot of interesting blog posts or has done something crazy and weird and links me to it or something like that. In general, I recommend this to people all the time. Like think about how you can stand out when you have a lot of competition in particular. And like there is a lot of competition in the junior developer market right now. I'd say tons of people graduating from boot camps and whatnot. So think about how you're going to be, oh, this is the girl that, or this is the woman that did this thing. That's right. She was the one that did that really cool thing with the whatever, as opposed to, applicant number 47 that also went to a boot camp that also has a couple gems or like a couple of Rails apps to show. Like just think about how you're going to be someone different and you'll be the person that did that. Oh, that crazy, weird, interesting, whatever thing.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't been in a position of like reviewing junior developer resumes a lot. Like we hire apprentices at thoughtbot, but like because of how competitive that is, they tend to be like pretty advanced. Like I wouldn't call them junior developers really. Like I remember, one of the apprentices I interviewed was Paul Smith, who works here now. And he had created like a web page that was all about like why you wanted to work at thoughtbot with links to different things, well designed, because like he was saying like when I interviewed him, he was like, I'm very interested in doing design. Like I think I'm really capable of that. And it was like, well, yeah, you are. That website looked great. Like that type of thing. So like you say, finding a way to stand out. Like everybody has the, toy-ish, maybe they're slightly above toy level Rails apps they've built before, but finding a way to differentiate yourself and show that like you are more than like just somebody who went through this program and is now looking for a job. You are passionate about this and you're passionate about the company you're applying to, even if you have to slightly fake it sometimes.
Yes. Nothing wrong with a little bit of faking. Daniel Strong is asking, Ben, do you have anything planned for the next Code-cation? Any new languages to try or places to go? No, nothing planned. We often don't really pre-plan it that much. With the Code-cation thing.
Yes,
I should explain it. So I go on these vacations with a friend of mine, Chris Hunt, where we go somewhere interesting and also like sort of take on a programming task that's sort of outside our normal job. So the first time we went and we did a bunch of ClojureScript, we went to Costa Rica. And then the second time we went to Boulder and we built this thing called TrailMix, which is a replacement for OLife, which is like a daily journaling service. And we have a third one loosely scheduled for somewhere in September. He might be coming here, but we don't know what we're going to do. And that's sort of by design, I think. Both times we had a plan going into it and the plan changed like on the first day. And so I think we probably will end up doing something funky and interesting and fun for us, but probably not super real world applicable.
Right.
It's kind of our thing. So yeah. Don't really know yet. We'll see, but we'll talk about it once we do it. We always end up like I did conference talks last time. Sometimes we'll do blog posts and whatnot. We'll see. Crispin asks, what do you guys do away from programming that helps you keep balance? I see. You want to answer that one? By the way, we're out of questions after this one, so please throw some questions in the app.
Pump them in there.
Yeah.
Let's see. I have two boys that are 5 and 3, or one just turned 3 the other day, and the other's going to turn 5 in a couple months. So they keep me busy, and I love that. Like I love that I can go home and like they don't like my 5-year-old will ask me how my day was, but he doesn't care. So
most people that ask you how your day was don't care.
Yeah, that's true.
On average, you're like, how you doing? You're good. How you doing? Yeah, good.
Yeah, that is a good point, I guess. Yeah. But like, so I just get down in the dirt, play with them. So that's fun. I've been getting back into riding my bike a lot. Like before I had kids, I was like a pretty intense cyclist and was in much better shape than I currently am. So I've been like negotiating with my wife to get some time to also do that, which is important. And the negotiation goes both ways. Like I'm like, and you like to run, so you get some time to do the running. I get time to ride my bike. So I do a lot of that. Playing sports, basketball, things like that. I coach my 5-year-old soccer team. That's a lot of fun.
Nice.
That type of
A
thing.
5-year-old that all standing in a circle around the ball, kicking it.
Yeah.
Or sitting down and playing with grass.
Mostly kicking it if I can get them onto the field. Sometimes they don't even want to leave their mom's side. It's fun.
Yeah, for me, exercise is a big one. Like my happiness is roughly equivalent to how much exercise I get per week. Like it's almost like a crazy correlation. So lately that's been boxing. I ride my bike as well. So do a little bit of meditating. Not that much, like a couple minutes in the morning. That helps a bit. I'm not quite doing enough right now to make it like noticeable, but when I do commit to it and I'm doing even like 10 or 15 minutes a day, it makes a big difference. I notice I just have better control over my thoughts and like I get less stressed. I can focus a little bit better. So that helps me a lot when I do it, which I'm not quite disciplined enough about. I like the
exercising, especially I've been riding my bike to work like all of May. Once the weather got nice enough to actually do that again in Boston.
Yeah.
So I've been riding my bike to work every day and like, nice. I love showing up and like already being charged up.
Feels
like
awesome.
I'm already like, oh, okay, I got a little work. It's not far. It's a small bike ride, but like, it's like, okay, I got my blood pumping. I was thinking about what I was going to work on my way into work. Like,
what a huge difference.
I wasn't like sitting on a train and like, oh, when am I going to get there? Or like sitting in a car, God forbid.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Tom, you took that link down. What number was the Code-cation thing?
123.
So we touched on Code-cation earlier. If you want to hear more about it, you can go to giantrobots.fm/123. And that's me with Chris Hunt talking about what's going on or what Code-cations are for us. This is a great question.
Thanks, Tom.
Tom has asked, who has the superior podcast? Can you box to settle this dispute?
I don't want to box you. You have a much bigger reach than I do. You're trained.
If you just knock out both my contacts, though, you might get a shot.
Just take the gloves off and
that might do it.
We have different podcasts. We talked about this. I'm going to be on Giant Robots.
You are.
That episode.
I was on. It'll be out soon. Yep.
And we talked about how like they fill different niches. So.
Definitely. Yeah. We're an interview show, or Giant Robots is an interview. You're a much more technical, talk about technical things podcast. So
kind of in the spirit of how like Giant Robots started and then moved away from for understandable reasons that we talked about. So
so listen to Derek's episode on Giant Robots to hear our discussion about our
various podcasts. We're plugging podcasts all over the place.
All crazy. Crispin doing it again. Seems like the programming community tends to be dominated by youth. True. Have you found that it's harder for older junior developers to break into the industry asking for a friend? Nice.
Asking for a friend.
Yes. I think age discrimination is real. I think you will have a harder time breaking into the industry as an older person. Definitely. And so I think that's a reality. Yeah. And it sucks and it's not fair and it's short-sighted. I also sort of get it. Like I sort of understand the natural human tendencies. Like like if your company is mostly 25-year-olds and someone walks in and they're 53, like you don't get that immediate sense of like, this is the next team member. Like it's just the person is so different from you. I understand where some of that comes from, and it's not okay. It's not legal. It's not good. It's unfair. But I think it is totally real and is something that you kind of just got to fight by being awesome as you can, like being that standout person. Right. So, you're going to stand out if you are substantially older than like the person interviewing for your sample. So also stand out in a way of like, but this is the guy that did the thing, or this is the woman that did the thing, and she's awesome, and clearly because she did this awesome stuff. Yep. So that's my advice. I mentored somebody for a little while who was probably mid or late 50s almost, and trying to get. And I think he had done some programming before and was having trouble getting hired again. I was trying to get into Ruby. And I was straight with him. I was like, look, this is an uphill battle for sure. And so you gotta just be that much more awesome, which is totally not cool and not fair. And I can't stress that enough. Right. But I think is the reality of the world.
Yeah, it definitely happens. Like I just turned 35, which isn't old. I don't feel, I feel like it's old, but in the grand scheme of things, isn't that old. Yeah. But like most of the people I work with here are younger than me just through, that's what happened. Right. Yeah. I don't think we do a bad job at hiring diverse people here, but, and like there are times like I make references to things I think everybody knows, and it's like, nobody knows that. I'm just over. Okay, but like
you say, G Willikers all the time.
G Willikers all the time. Yeah, it's talking about the war.
World War I, which you were in.
Yeah,
yeah, I remember that.
The Great War. But I think that like I've had conversations with my friend Damien about this quite a bit, who works for a different company and is a few years older than me. And like even 5 years ago, we were having conversations like, are we going to be doing this when we're 40? Are we just going to be developers when we're 40? Like, is that okay that we're developers when we're 40? Should we be managers when we're 40. And I was like, God, I hope not. Like, I don't want to be like a mid-level manager. I'd rather just do development at a small company.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I moved to doing. But, you know, if you want to be that mid-level manager type person, like, I think that's what people expect of people in their 40s and in their 50s and in their upper 30s, like I am now.
Yep.
They expect you to be like on that management track. And I'm just not, it's not interesting to me. So,
yeah. So yeah, I think given that you are going to be fighting a little bit of an uphill battle or against expectations and whatnot, like you can probably weave a little bit by where you are applying. Like, small startup company in San Francisco is going to have different expectations about your age versus like a much larger established company in, you know.
Yeah, that advice, that's so painful to hear though. Like, what if you really want to work for that small startup company?
I totally agree.
Yeah,
I totally agree. I can't stress enough that I don't think this is a good thing.
Right.
And I want it to change, and it should change and all that. But yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
So there we go. Yeah. Jerry asks, is Joe still around? Is he still running Arch?
Arch
yeah.
Linux.
Oh, Arch Linux. Yeah. Do you sense that Max on the wane as a first choice Ruby development environment?
Yes, he's still around. Yes, he's still running Arch. And no, I don't think that Max are waning as a first choice Ruby development environment.
Agreed.
I just, yeah, I don't know.
Agreed on all that. Although I had dinner with a friend of mine who is one of those later 30s, moved into management, but still like architect-y kind of guy. And they have an app that for whatever reason is 11 separate applications somehow. We like to give each other a lot of hard time because like his app is 11 separate apps, and he spends like 80% of his time in meeting and doesn't write any code, but their app makes $80 million a year. So he like tells me that I don't run a real business, and I tell him that he doesn't know anything about programming, and we sort of get to make fun of each other in fun ways. But he just said he switched all his team to Ubuntu boxes because like the app just doesn't work on OS 10 and just works fine on Ubuntu, and they can't get it to work on OS 10 and blah, blah, blah. So maybe there's like a slight death knell, but I told him that the problem is that your app is 11 different pieces, and it's so complicated you need to switch operating systems to make it work.
Yeah.
And then we had another drink, and it was fun. I don't know what to do with that.
Tom?
Yes.
Is there, so Tom, Dave asked, did Adarsh kill off his podcast? Are there going to be more episodes of that podcast?
We are going to drop a bunch of them in the next couple of months.
Okay.
And then Saran has expressed an interest in picking it up after Summit.
Okay, what was it called again?
Reboot.
Okay, so Adarsh hosted a podcast called Reboot, which is about people that switched into programming as a career from different
switched careers, I think.
Switched careers, period?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so we do have a bunch of those recorded. They're going to be coming out at some point soonish when Tom can get to it. And it looks like we have another person who wants to host this going forward, so there may be episodes in the future too.
Yep.
So yeah.
Oh, I don't know anything about these.
We're out of questions. Submit questions more, please, people.
That one coming to YouTube right now.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Tom. Oh, good. With all the hype, Brandon Newton asks, with all the hype around post CSS and CSS Next, would it be advisable to drop SaaS and start learning the new specs of CSS? I think we were the wrong guys for this.
Yeah,
question.
I know nothing about this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna Google it after this.
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard about post CSS, but I don't know.
I'm guessing these are more CSS.
CSS Next
things?
sounds like JS Next, so it sounds like maybe CSS Next is like the next version of CSS.
CSS on the client.
Isn't that where CSS is?
But it comes from the server. MVC, CSS MVC.
Yeah, that's clearly where it's going.
It's going to be you're going to have your
models, views,
CSS
and
models, and
controllers.
your CSS views, and your CSS controllers. Yeah, I don't think we know. But if you post this on the forum and ping me, I can bring in some people from thoughtbot that know about things like this, like our awesome designers, and maybe get some input that way. Tom has found a comment on YouTube from Max H. Who says, what is a concern you had as a junior web developer, and how did it turn out? What is a concern we had, and then how did it turn out?
I think I was always concerned about somebody figuring out that I knew nothing, right? Yeah. So like it's imposter syndrome.
That jumped
and
in
I
my
think
head too.
always concerned that somebody was going to catch on, right? Or that I didn't know as much as the person next to me. And that didn't wane. Like
you still have that.
I mean, I don't have it as much.
Certain things trigger it though, right?
Yes, certain thing. Doing anything new, right? Is like, oh my gosh, I only know this small slice, and that's all I can do, and I can't venture outside this box, that kind of thing. So I think that's the one thing that jumps to mind is the imposter syndrome. Now that I've done it and I've been doing web development for long enough, I know it's just imposter syndrome. And yes, I have learned new languages before and I have learned new things before. It'll be fine.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
I was also concerned about like when I was a very junior web developer, I remember being like, well, what language am I going to pick to do my career in? I thought that was a thing you had to do. Like I had to be am I going to be a Perl developer forever? Like, is this where I want to specialize? And like, I was going to get like a Java certification at one point because I thought that was going to be super useful.
Yep.
So those were the types of things that I think I spent a lot of time concerned about that didn't actually bear any fruit at all. And I never think about anymore at all.
Yeah. Cool. Sage asks, what host would you recommend for someone who's going to launch their first Rails app? Podcast host, do you mean?
No, I think he means like web host. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Heroku. I'm a huge fan of Heroku,
Yep.
and we are at thoughtbot in general. Like I think 95% of our work is pushed to Heroku. So
yep. Find a way to make it work on Heroku. If for whatever reason you need file system access or something that's persistent file system access, then
you probably don't.
You probably don't. But if you do, I don't like DigitalOcean with
sponsors
the
of the
Giant Robots
and Bike Shed podcast.
Not the bike. They're not sponsoring the Bike Shed.
They're not?
Yeah, they should be.
Oh, I guess that answers the question: whose podcast is better? Dave Moore asks, as Ruby devs at thoughtbot, how much CSS/JavaScript do you have to do? Where's the line between designers and Ruby developers? And the line is that I don't write almost any CSS, but I do. If JavaScript has to be written, I write it.
I don't think there is a line. No? I think it depends. Like I write a lot of CSS.
Do you? I guess I kind of do too. Lately.
You know, I am definitely deferential. Like if you know, I'll like if I see a bunch of stuff in the backlog that's design stuff that I think I can handle, I will just handle it and then ping Lydia or whoever the designer is that I'm working with and be like, hey, I did this. I hope it's okay. And then I learn something when they're like, oh no, actually do it this way. Or they're like, yeah, that's totally reasonable. I'm like, oh, great, cool.
That's cool. Yeah.
So I do a lot of that. I think we all, as developers, we do a lot of JavaScript, I think. So.
Yeah. I do very little because I'm pretty adamant about keeping out of Upcase.
Yeah,
so I
true.
do almost none of it.
Okay.
And when there has to be done, I make someone else do it, which is the benefit of being a client. Daniel asks, do either of you use mechanical keyboards like the HHKB, which I haven't heard of?
Happy Hacker.
Happy Hacker. I do. I use the Kinesis Advantage Pro, I'm pretty sure it's called, which is awesome. And I love it. And it helped me a lot with RSI issues, mostly because it gets rid of the pinky pronation. So most keyboards have like enter is you have to sort of make this motion with the pinky or like backspace. And with the Kinesis, they move all those things to your thumb. Like control and alt and space and backspace and enter, all those things are a thumb key, which I'm a huge fan of.
Okay. Pet peeve, I do use a mechanical keyboard. It's just the Apple one.
Yeah.
So that's what I use the Apple Bluetooth mechanical keyboard because I don't like wires. So I want it to be Bluetooth. So I have that. And it drives me crazy because every once in a while the batteries run out and like my E key is stuck down as I'm like, oh shit, where's the batteries?
At least that doesn't do something crazy in Vim. Use your cursor.
So yeah, I use that. I have used a lot of keyboards. I used to be a big Microsoft Natural keyboard kind of thing. It was like, then I was like, this thing is mush. Why do I like this? So I just moved to the Apple thing. It's the same keyboard everywhere.
Yeah, mechanical. Yeah, that's a good pet peeve. Like the mechanical keyboard.
It does have switches in it. It is mechanical.
What keyboard is not mechanical?
But yeah, the clicky stuff.
Your iPhone keyboard is not mechanical.
Yeah, that one's not mechanical. But yeah, that's what I use.
Cool. Tom has brought up something. If you are interested in mechanical keyboards, we have there's a lightning talk on our YouTube channel by Justin Kenyon, who talks.
He has like 4 or 5 mechanical keyboards.
He's got a bunch of mechanical keyboards. It's his passion. So take a peek over there.
I've always been interested. Maybe I'll give it a whirl again. Who knows?
So it's 3:56. We have time for a couple more questions. I think we're going to go till 4. So if you have any last minute questions you'd like us to answer before we head out, throw them in there. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up pretty shortly. Dave asks, as Ruby devs at thoughtbot,
we did that one.
We did this one. In that case, there are no questions. So I'm going to give y'all.
There's 16 of you. Come on.
16. I'm going to give you like
lightning round
seconds.
time.
Lightning round. If you drop a question in there in the next 30 seconds or so, we'll answer it before we go. And otherwise, we will bid you adieu.
We answered all of the questions.
We did. We told people they could ask us anything, and we answered the things they asked.
Yeah. Only about programming.
It didn't get very personal. I was expecting, you know, if they ask me anything, like I always expect people to just take advantage of that in a big way, and they usually don't.
I didn't say I would answer everything, but
That's a good point. Ask me anything. Fine, you have asked.
Okay. Seems like people are happy.
I think they are. Well,
That was fun.
all of you, thanks for tuning in.
Mhm.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah, it was a lot of
making
fun.
it so it's not just me talking for 90 minutes. If you think of a question later that you want us to answer and feel like you've missed out, throw it on the forum, ping us, and we'll drop in and answer your questions. And thanks for coming by. See ya.
Okay.